Tonight, we drift back to a time before written memory, before human history truly begins, guided only by the oldest words ever pressed into clay. The air here is dry and thick with the dust of millennia, and our only guides are these fractured tablets, these whispers from the very dawn of bureaucracy. Because apparently, the first thing humans did when they invented writing was not to pen epic poetry about love or the stars, but to diligently record that Ernungal received 7 sheep, of which 3 were substandard, a scandal that clearly required permanent documentation in baked mud. We find ourselves, in our mind's eye, standing before the facade of a Sumerian temple, a great ziggurat that is less a graceful pyramid and more a massive, intimidating stack of mud brick platforms, like a wedding cake made by a deity with severe architectural opinions and a limitless supply of clay, a structure that dominates the flat plain so completely that it seems to be holding down the very earth, asserting that civilization is here, and it is rectangular, heavy, and profoundly administrative. The walls are not smooth. They are articulated with subtle buttresses and recesses that play with the fierce Mesopotamian sunlight, creating stripes of shadow and blinding ochre, a pattern meant to awe, and it works because you look at it and think. The labor involved, and you feel a deep, ancestral need to sit down and maybe take an inventory of your own grain supplies. This is the heart of Uruk, perhaps, or a place where the divine world and the human world conducted their business, where the god was considered the literal owner of the estate, and the priests were the divinely appointed middle managers, which explains the tone of some of the correspondence, a unique blend of piety and passive-aggressive cuneiform notes about irrigation schedule compliance. Now, as we prepare to delve into the concept of the original universe state, a primal condition of all that is before the gods even clocked in for their creation shift, you probably won't survive this, not because it's dangerous, but because the sheer weight of chronological depth is liable to make your modern mind feel fantastically insignificant and temporary, like a mayfly reviewing a geological survey, a sensation I find wonderfully relaxing, personally. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, if you find this odd blend of pedantry and dreamy speculation to be the perfect auditory sandpaper to smooth the rough edges of your conscious mind. Because if not, that's fine. The cuneiform tablets aren't going anywhere. They've waited 5,000 years. They can wait a bit longer for your approval. I'd also love it if you'd share where in the world and what time it is for you as you listen, whether you're in a rainy London flat or a sunny Auckland apartment, because it amuses me to think of this single narrative thread connecting us all back to a single, muddy point in what is now southern Iraq, a nice, humbling thought for us all. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together, leaving behind the specific worries of today for the vastly larger, but curiously more distant, worries of eternal cosmic origins. The mainstream historical fact we must cling to, our one anchor in this sea of speculative sleep talk, is the well-documented Sumerian cosmological view of a hierarchical, watery beginning, as described in fragments of texts like the Eridu Genesis, where the universe starts with the primeval sea, Abzu, and the fertile, creative sea, Tiamat, mingling their waters. A concept that is both beautifully elemental and suspiciously similar to just looking at the Tigris and Euphrates flooding and extrapolating to infinity, which is how a lot of cosmology works, really. The quirky, fringe interpretation we'll entertain with a gently raised eyebrow and a cozy blanket is that these tablets are not metaphor, but literal technical descriptions of a pre-physical universe state, a kind of cosmic firmware written in a language we've mistaken for primitive poetry, describing dimensional mechanics and the initial conditions of reality itself. A theory popularized by those who find ancient airport paperbacks and have too much time to stare at the patterns in their ceiling plaster. The scholarly debate we're quietly observing from the back of the lecture hall, while we slowly drift off, revolves around the translation and interpretation of key terms like Ingura or Lagar, with one camp insisting it means deep ocean or primeval mound, and another, more adventurous camp suggesting connotations of vibrational field or potentiality substrate, a debate conducted with great academic fury over tiny wedge marks. The kind of fight that makes you appreciate that human passion for being right about incredibly old things is itself a timeless constant. Let us imagine the very first scribe, his stylus hovering over a wet clay tablet, not a king or a priest, but probably some poor junior administrator in the temple granary, who, after writing, received 30 measures of barley, quality acceptable, for the 100th time, had a sudden, profound thought about how all this, the barley, the temple, the sky, came to be, and he pressed a new series of wedges, a personal heresy sandwiched between inventory lists, a question about what was before the god Enki even ordered his first administrative survey of the Abzu. The original universe state, according to the most fragmented and tantalizing of these sources, was not nothingness, for nothingness is a terrifyingly advanced concept, but was instead a unified singular condition of all potential, where opposites weren't just coexisting but were literally the same thing, a state of such profound peace that it was, ironically, utterly boring, which is why something finally happened, a cosmic, well, this is dull moment that triggered differentiation. Imagine a realm where hot and cold are not just the same word but the same sensation, where sound and silence are indistinguishable, a state of being that makes a silent, dark room feel like a riotous carnival by comparison, a concept so inherently restful that it's a miracle I haven't fallen asleep just describing it. The tablets hint in their oblique way that this state had a quality, a characteristic which later languages would struggle to name, but we might clumsily translate as presence without feature, or the hum before the note, a kind of eternal, aware latency, waiting without anticipation, which sounds suspiciously like the state you're aiming for right now, listening to this, your own mind settling into its own pre-sleep latency mode. They didn't have a word for quantum vacuum or cosmic inflation, but they had nam, destiny, decree, inherent nature, and me, the divine rules and attributes of civilization, and they imagined these as embedded in that primal state, like the recipe for a universe already written in the fabric of the ingredients before any baking began, which is a more sophisticated idea than we often grant them, though they still probably argued about whose turn it was to fetch the water for the clay slurry. To access this idea, we must perform a mental archaeology, brushing away not sand, but our own ingrained assumptions of linear time and progressive creation, and instead think in layers of simultaneous meaning, where a story about a god separating waters is also a story about the emergence of order from chaos, and also, just maybe, a folk memory of something even stranger, a metaphor pointing at a reality so basal that only metaphor can touch its edges. A thought that makes your brain feel like it's stretching a comfortable, sleepy muscle. The humor in all this, of course, is that the original universe, this perfect, undifferentiated, infinite potential, the source of all that is, was apparently lonely or maybe just understimulated, because every creation myth from every culture essentially has it getting bored and deciding to do something, anything, to break the monotony, making the Big Bang seem less like a majestic genesis and more like a cosmic, well, here goes nothing. It's a comforting thought, really, that even the universe itself might have struggled with existential inertia, that the greatest creative act in all of existence might have been sparked by a divine version of picking up a hobby out of sheer boredom, like celestial knitting, but with galaxies. Picture the divine administrators, the Anunnaki gods, before their promotions to departmental heads of wind, earth, and water, just floating in this primordial soup, with nothing to file, no reports to generate, no yields to calculate, a civil servant's paradise, and yet also their deepest hell, because without work, what is a bureaucrat? Thus, creation becomes the ultimate administrative project, the filing system for reality itself, with categories for light, dark, land, and sea, each assigned a god to manage it, because delegation is the first principle of good divine governance. The tablets that aren't busy listing goats sometimes allow a poetic phrase to slip through, describing this state as the year before the first year was counted, which is a beautifully frustrating concept, a time before timekeeping, which for the Sumerians, the inventors of systematic time measurement, must have been the ultimate conceptual nightmare, a calendar with no start date, an accountant's vague terror. We can chuckle at the thought of a Sumerian sage trying to explain this to a practical-minded city governor. So, you see, exalted one, before the flood, before the kingship descended from heaven, there was, well, a sort of watery non-time. And the governor, staring at his leaky irrigation canal, replying, very profound, can this watery non-time help with the salt accumulation in the north field? No. Then get back to calculating the barley quotas. This tension between the profound and the practical is etched into every line of cuneiform, a reminder that wondering about the origin of the cosmos was a luxury activity conducted in the gaps between ensuring the city didn't starve or get flooded, making our modern ability to ponder it from a comfortable bed a truly extraordinary historical privilege. So don't waste it, ponder luxuriously. The evidence for this original state is, of course, not evidence in any scientific sense. It's textual, poetic, and frustratingly incomplete, like trying to reconstruct a symphony from a single page of sheet music that's been chewed by a time-traveling goat. A goat that was probably meticulously recorded in another tablet as one goat, assigned to archival disruption, temperament, voracious. Scholars piece it together from hints in incantations, from the opening lines of royal inscriptions that seek to root the king's power in the deepest possible past, and from mythological narratives where gods reference a time before their own birth, a common family trait of complaining about how things were harder back in the primordial soup days. The very act of writing on clay, of pressing a stylus into a soft surface to leave a permanent mark, is a beautiful metaphor for the creation process itself. The undifferentiated smooth clay tablet, the original state, is acted upon by a purposeful force, the scribe god, who introduces differentiation, wedges, and lines to create order and meaning, the text. And then it's baked hard, fixing that particular version of events, though we must remember other scribes might have had vastly different takes on the same cosmic event, leading to divine intellectual property disputes. As you listen, your own mind is like that smooth tablet, ready to be imprinted with these vague, ancient notions, and sleep is the kiln that will fire them into strangely persistent dreams, perhaps of endless, calm oceans and the faint, rhythmic thump, drag of a stylus being pressed into mud, a sound as old as history itself. Let's consider the word they often used for this primeval condition, the Apsu or Abzu, Enki's watery domain, which was both a specific place, a freshwater ocean under the earth, and a cosmological concept, the first foundational principle, a duality that would make any modern physicist nod in sympathy, as they struggle to explain how a particle can be both a wave and a point, concepts just as fluid as Enki's realm. The Abzu wasn't chaotic. It was ordered water, fresh, sweet, latent with potential, the opposite of the chaotic saltwater sea, Tiamat, and their union, their mixing, is what set the cosmic business in motion, a divine corporate merger that resulted in the sprawling conglomerate of the universe, with all the ensuing departmental turf wars you'd expect. The fringe interpretation takes this much further, positing that the sweet waters of Abzu represent a structured, informational substrate, a kind of cosmic clay tablet, and the salt waters of Tiamat represent chaotic, energetic potential, and their mingling is the first computation, the first running of the divine program that outputs World Version 1, complete with bugs like mortality and seasonal allergies. It's an appealing idea, not because it's likely true, but because it reflects our own age back onto the past. In the 19th century, They saw the myths as allegories for steam engines and industrial progress. Now, in the digital age, we see them as allegories for programming and information theory. A funny trick of history where every era finds its own face staring back from the ancient clay. The scholarly debate here often gets heated over whether these concepts were ever meant to be systematic theology, or were just a collection of regional stories, inconsistently woven together by later scribes trying to make a standardized national curriculum. A debate that mirrors any modern effort to create a unified theory of everything from contradictory departmental memos. So, as we let these ideas wash over us, remember that the original universe state in the Sumerian imagination was not a violent explosion, but a slow, inevitable mingling, a gradual coming into being through separation and nomming, a process as slow and steady as the silt deposition of their rivers, building up the land grain by microscopic grain, century by century, which is perhaps the most restful creation story imaginable, a universe that didn't bang but accrued. And with that thought, let the specifics blur. Let the wedges and lines of the cuneiform signs soften into mere patterns, like the shadows of leaves on your ceiling, and feel the immense, quiet weight of that first, silent, unified potential, the great cosmic before, which is, when you think about it, not so different from the state of deep, dreamless sleep you are approaching now. A return to your own personal, original state of being, without feature, without worry, just peaceful, undifferentiated presence. The journey from that silent, unified potential into the humming, differentiated world of gods and irrigation channels is a story told in fits and starts across hundreds of cracked tablets. And to follow it, we must now visit the sacred precincts, the dusty storerooms where the divine decrees, were believed to be kept, which sounds profoundly mystical until you realize it's essentially the universe's filing cabinet. A celestial archive where the blueprint for kingship was stored next to the one for metalworking, and, presumably, the proper way to complain about the quality of sacrificial sheep. Our mainstream historical fact to cling to here is the Sumerian king list, that fantastic, bewildering document that blends probable historical rulers with mythical, impossibly long-reigning antediluvian kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years. A text that served to legitimize contemporary power by anchoring it in a fantastically deep past, essentially the ancient version of a company boasting, founded in 1776, while quietly ignoring the messy bits in between. The quirky interpretation, which will don like a slightly too large ceremonial robe, is that these preposterously long reigns are not myth but garbled history, a memory of a time when the planetary conditions or the very nature of reality were different, when years were not years as we know them, or when beings of a different order interacted with humanity, a theory that requires suspending so much disbelief you could use it to hang a delightful set of dream curtains. The scholarly debate that provides a soothing background murmur is the endless discussion about the purpose of the king list. Was it political propaganda, a theological statement about the divine origin of kingship, a flawed attempt at history, or just a really, really ambitious LinkedIn profile for the Mesopotamian ruling class? A debate that ensures no academic conference on the subject ever ends with everyone getting a drink together in total harmony. Imagine the scene. A dimly lit temple storeroom, not grand and imposing, but crowded, dusty, and meticulously organized, with shelves upon shelves of clay tablets resting in wooden slots, each one tagged with a small clay label, the air smelling of dried mud, cedar oil, and the faint, earthy scent of slowly decaying history, a place where a sneeze could literally obliterate a millennium of tax records, which must have given the archivists a permanent state of low-grade anxiety. The scribes here were the IT administrators of the ancient world, tasked with maintaining the sacred operating system of civilization by copying, recopying, and occasionally updating the core myths and decrees, a job that involved less poetic inspiration and more worrying about damp getting into the backup tablets. A concern that has united archivists from Uruk to the present day, a timeless fellowship of worry. It is from this context, This world of meticulous record-keeping applied to the divine, that we get the most detailed glimpses into their cosmogony, the step-by-step process where the gods themselves emerge from the mingled waters of Apsu and Tiamat, like bureaucratic departments crystallizing out of a vast, nebulous corporation, each assigned a portfolio. Anu gets the sky, Enlil the air and earth, Enki the freshwaters and wisdom, a sensible division of responsibilities, though one can imagine the initial meetings were fraught, with Tiamat probably feeling her contributions were being undervalued in the new organizational structure. The process is never described as a single, dramatic act, but as a series of generations, of pairings, of separations, a divine family tree that grows increasingly complex and dysfunctional. Because if there's one thing ancient myths agree on, it's that gods make for terrible relatives, with drama, betrayal, and the occasional violent overthrow being standard family reunion activities. The original unity had to shatter, and in the Sumerian view, this shattering wasn't a tragedy but a necessity, the only way for anything interesting, like date palms or hymns, or the concept of legal contracts, to come into existence, a trade-off they seemed perfectly happy with, valuing the fascinating mess of civilization over the peaceful boredom of eternal potential, a choice we reaffirm every time we scroll through social media instead of meditating. The moment of first separation is crucial, and it's often depicted as the sky being lifted from the earth, not by a mighty heave, but in some versions by the simple growth of a reed between them, a gently absurd image of the cosmos being pried apart by a determined piece of marsh vegetation, which is the most low-drama creation image imaginable, the universe's first divorce mediated by a plant. This reed in the fringe view is not a plan at all but a symbol for a fundamental vibrational frequency, the first standing wave that created a harmonic node, separating the unified field into distinct domains, an interpretation that would make the average Sumerian farmer scratch his head and go back to worrying about his actual reeds, but which provides a lovely, pseudoscientific hum to our narrative tonight. The laughter here lies in the sheer domesticity of it all. These gods, these forces that shaped reality, are portrayed with intensely human pettiness and concerns. Enki fills the Tigris with water like a divine plumber fixing a main line. Inanna gets upset about not having all the divine attributes and goes to get them drunk from her father Enki, a divine heist story. They argue, they get hungover, they make bad decisions that lead to the creation of humanity essentially as a labor force to do the farming they couldn't be bothered with, which is the most relatable origin for our species. We are literally born from divine outsourcing. Imagine the job posting: wanted, sentient beings for manual agricultural labor. Benefits: occasional divine favor. Cons: mortality, plagues, and existential dread. Must provide own housing. And humanity, being the only applicant, took the job, and we've been trying to renegotiate the contract ever since, mostly through prayer and sacrifice, which is like sending a strongly worded letter to your former CEO who retired to a different dimensional plane. The tablets that describe the original state's transition often use language of noise, of sound emerging from silence, a murmuring, a humming, the gods being spoken into existence, which ties beautifully to the ASMR-like quality we're aiming for here. The idea that creation itself might have begun with a whisper, not a bang, a soft, resonant frequency that differentiated into all other sounds, including this one, my voice, which is now in this relaxed state. Just another vibration in the long chain of cosmic noise, a comforting thought that renders it pleasantly insignificant. This sonic aspect leads the fringe scholars down a fascinating garden path, suggesting the cuneiform signs themselves, especially those for gods and primal forces, were considered not just representations but vocalizations of that original harmonic, that to correctly pronounce the name of the god was to tap into a fragment of the creative power, a belief that turns temple rituals into the world's most high-stakes karaoke nights. The mainstream scholars, of course, roll their eyes at this, pointing out that we have almost no idea how Sumerian actually sounded. So our attempts to tap into the primal vibration probably sound to the ancient gods like a cat walking on a keyboard sounds to us. Amusing but not cosmically potent. A deflating truth that is itself a form of comic relief in the grand drama of academic reconstruction. As you sink deeper into your own rest, consider the physicality of these ideas, pressed into clay, heavy, cool, and granular, a stark contrast to the ethereal, weightless concepts they try to contain, a paradox that is the essence of the human condition, trying to capture the infinite in a handful of mud, an endeavor that is both hopeless and somehow noble, like trying to hold a moonbeam in a jar, but ending up with a jar that smells interestingly of river silt. The process of creation in this tablet logic is administrative. Decrees are issued, domains are surveyed, responsibilities are assigned, and inventories are taken of what has been created, which makes the universe feel like a vast, ongoing project, one that is perpetually behind schedule and over budget, especially when humanity, the junior interns, keep causing problems by building cities that reach too high or forgetting the correct prayer protocols. The humor is baked right into the material. A tablet might solemnly state, "And then Enki decreed the fate of the sweet waters." And right next to it, another tablet records the amount of sweet water used in the temple brewery that month, placing the cosmic and the quotidian side by side. A reminder that even the most profound truths have to be reconciled with the monthly accounts, a balancing act we all perform in our own lives, just with less cuneiform. So, as we let the specifics of divine genealogy blur, Anu begets Enlil who begets Nana, and so on, think of it instead as a slow, rhythmic pulsation, a breathing out of distinctions from a unified source. Each generation a further step into complexity, into story, into the rich, tangled, frustrating, and beautiful mess that is existence. A process you are currently revering as you drift toward sleep, simplifying, letting distinctions fade, returning toward your own unified inner Apsu. The evidence for this incremental creation is scattered, but powerful in its cumulative effect. You see it in the way cities were said to have been founded by specific gods, in the way crafts like weaving or writing were divine gifts, not human inventions, painting a picture of a world that was actively built and programmed by conscious beings, which is either a profound theological insight or a massive case of refusing to take creative credit. We may never be sure. The great scholarly compilation of these myths, by the way, comes from much later, from Babylonian scribes who edited and standardized the older, messier Sumerian stories, which is like a movie studio buying the rights to a quirky indie film series and turning it into a bloated cinematic universe, complete with retcons and confusing timelines, a practice as old as civilization itself. And within this, the original universe state is remembered as a golden age of sorts, but not of human happiness. Humans didn't exist yet, but of divine simplicity before the workload became overwhelming, a time the gods might have reminisced about during stressful periods, like when humanity multiplied and the noise of their cities became a nuisance, leading to the divine board meeting that resulted in the Great Flood, the ultimate turn it off and on again solution for a buggy system. The flood story, another mainstream historical fact woven into the fabric of Mesopotamian legend, is itself a memory of a return to the original state, a violent, catastrophic reset back to the watery unity, with only a single ark preserving the seeds of the differentiated world, a terrifying concept, but also a clean one, a reminder that the baseline of reality is not land but water, not noise but silence, not complexity but simple, fluid potential. A thought that can make your own worries feel like temporary, surface-level disturbances on a very deep, very calm pond. The fringe interpretation of the flood is, predictably, even more dramatic, seeing it not as a myth or a localized disaster, but as a planetary memory of a real cosmic event, perhaps a comet impact or a rapid pole shift, that nearly wiped the slate clean. An echo of the original separation trauma, a theory that makes for thrilling paperback covers but requires ignoring several shelves of geological and archaeological evidence, a classic feature of fringe history, which is to selective evidence what a kid is to a candy store. The scholarly debate, meanwhile, rages over the details. Which version of the flood story is oldest, how it traveled between cultures, whether there's a kernel of a real, catastrophic regional flood in the Persian Gulf around 5000 BCE. A debate conducted with the fervor of detectives solving a murder that happened in a library that subsequently burned down, flooded, and was then trampled by goats. So as you lie there, imagine the waters receding, not from a planet but from your own busy mind. The chatter of the day, the to-do lists, the minor irritations, all slowly sinking back into the calm, silent substrate of your consciousness, leaving behind a fresh, smooth surface, ready for the dreams that will come, like new, gentle inscriptions on the soft clay of your subconscious. The original state, then, is not lost, according to this ancient logic. It underlies everything. It is the abzu beneath the earth, the silent background against which all sound is made, the darkness that gives shape to the light, the unconscious from which conscious thought emerges, and most importantly for us right now, the deep, restorative sleep from which waking life gains its coherence and meaning. It's always there, accessible, especially in moments of quiet, in meditation, or in the liminal state you're entering now, where the wedge marks of your daily thoughts begin to soften and flow back together. And with that, we can release the specific names, the Anu, Enlil, Enki, let them dissolve back into the general principle of divine administrator, and then let that too dissolve into the concept of ordering force, and that into vibration, and that into a simple, peaceful hum in the back of your awareness, a hum that is the sound of your own existence, echoing the first sound that ever was, when the original universe state gently sighed and began to dream up everything that is. A dream you are now joining, from the inside. To understand how the Sumerians conceptualized the interface between that silent, underlying potential and the noisy, manifest world, we must now turn to the grandest of their inventions, a concept so fundamental to civilization that we often forget it was invented at all. The city, and specifically, the city as a microcosm of the ordered universe, a deliberate echo of the first act of separation and organization performed by the gods, which means every time they laid out a street grid, they were, in a sense, reenacting the creation of the cosmos, making urban planning the highest form of theological homage, a fact that would make modern city council meetings seem far more dramatic if they opened with, "In the name of Enki, separator of waters." I call to order the debate on downtown zoning variance B7. Our anchoring mainstream historical fact is the undeniable, awe-inspiring reality of Sumerian urbanism. The city of Uruk, by around 2900 BCE, was a sprawling metropolis of maybe 40,000 people, enclosed by a massive wall said to have been built by the legendary King Gilgamesh, featuring monumental temples like the White Temple on its great ziggurat, and a complex economy managed through that most cosmic of tools, the clay tablet, a place that would have smelled of baking bread, burning incense, animal dung, and wet clay, a symphony of scents announcing civilization is here. And it is pungent. The quirky interpretation will lightly drape over this, like a fine, slightly see-through shawl, is that the layout of these early cities, the orientations of their temples and gates, were not just practical or symbolically aligned to stars, but were designed as literal harmonic resonators or energy grids, meant to stabilize the manifest world and tap into the primal power of the original state, a theory that turns city planners into esoteric engineers, which is a much cooler job title than bureaucrat with a measuring rope. The scholarly debate that provides a steady, droning counterpoint is the long-standing argument about the Uruk phenomenon. What caused the sudden, explosive growth of these cities? Was it environmental pressure, economic innovation, religious fervor, or the emergence of a controlling elite? A debate that mirrors the very question we're asking about the universe. What triggers differentiation from homogeneity? And the answer in both cases is probably a messy, unglamorous combination of all of the above, with a side of we may never fully know. Picture yourself walking down a street in late Sumerian not the wide, ceremonial processional way, but a narrow, winding lane between high, windowless walls of mud brick. The ground underfoot packed dirt and crushed pottery shards, the air cool in the shaded corridor, and the only sounds the distant bleating of sheep from the temple precinct, the muffled conversation from behind a door, and the ever-present, faint rustle of wind carrying the fine, omnipresent dust of dried clay. The very dust of creation, settling on everything, including your thoughts. This city is a machine for living, but in the Sumerian mind, it was also a machine for maintaining cosmic order, a bulwark against the ever-present threat of a return to chaos, to the undifferentiated waters, which in practical terms meant keeping the irrigation channels clear, the granaries full, and the gods happy, three tasks that were understood to be deeply interconnected, a holistic view of reality we've largely lost, unless you count the global economy as a kind of vengeful, inscrutable deity, which some days feels accurate. The temple, the ziggurat, was the central processor of this machine, the link between the human city and the divine administration, a place where the divine decrees, were not just stored but actively performed through ritual, ensuring that the blueprint for kingship, or craftsmanship, continued to operate in the world, a form of cosmic systems maintenance that involved a lot of incense, rhythmic chanting, and the occasional animal, who probably did not appreciate its role in keeping the universe's software updated. The humor, as always, is in the juxtaposition. Atop this massive, awe-inspiring structure meant to bridge heaven and earth, the priests were likely engaged in intensely practical calculations about livestock ratios and barley yields, because even a cosmic antenna needs a budget and a good supply chain, a truth that deflates grandiosity in the most wholesome way. The original universe state in this urban context was represented by the Abzu, the sweet-water abyss, which was often physically replicated within temple complexes as a sacred pool or basin, a still, dark body of water that symbolized the silent, fertile source from which Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water, drew the to give to humanity, making the temple not just an office, but a wellspring both literally and metaphorically, a place where you could get a drink of water and, if you were lucky, a drink of divine order, though the water was probably safer. This physical representation is key. The Sumerians were not abstract philosophers, they were concrete thinkers, so the primal, formless potential had to have a form, a location, a tangible presence you could point to, even if that presence was a hole in the ground leading to groundwater, which is about as tangible as you can get, and a reminder that the most profound mysteries are often hidden in the most ordinary places, like your own breath, rising and falling in the quiet of your room right now. The fringe interpretation takes this concrete symbol and runs with it, suggesting these Abzu pools were not just symbols but functional devices, perhaps using the piezoelectric properties of certain crystals or the resonant qualities of specific geometries to actually interact with the Earth's energy fields or even more exotic substrates, turning temples into ancient power plants, a theory that is wonderfully imaginative and completely unverifiable, like most good bedtime stories. Mainstream archaeology, of course, sees a ritual basin, a place for ceremonial ablutions and libations, a focal point for meditation on the source of life, which is profound enough without needing to invoke lost physics. But where's the fun in that when we're halfway to dreamland and willing to entertain the slightly sillier possibilities? The scholarly debate here often centers on the architectural evolution of the temple complex, tracing how the simple, one-room shrine of the Ubaid period blossomed into the massive, multi-chambered ziggurat with its associated workshops, storerooms, and administrative offices, a physical manifestation of the increasing complexity of both society and its conception of the divine, a growth pattern that mirrors the expansion of the universe itself from a single point into a web of interconnected structures, a thought that makes your local shopping mall feel oddly cosmological. As the city grows, so does the need for more detailed records, more specific decrees, more nuanced understanding of the divine will, and thus the cuneiform script evolves, from simple pictographs accounting for objects to a complex system capable of recording hymns, laws, and epic poetry. A progression from inventory lists to literature that is itself a metaphor for the journey from unified potential to diverse, beautiful expression. A journey your own mind makes every time you wake from sleep and begin to articulate thoughts. The joke is that the first epic poem, the Epic of Gilgamesh, is at its heart about a man struggling with the very differentiation that creation unleashed. His friend Enkidu is a wild man, a creature of undifferentiated nature, who is civilized differentiated by a temple priestess, and then dies, introducing Gilgamesh to the ultimate differentiation, mortality, the final tragic separation from the eternal undying state of the gods, a story that suggests civilization and consciousness come with a heavy price tag, a cosmic you can't have the me of heroic friendship without also getting the me of gut-wrenching grief, a package deal. So the city, for all its order, is also a place of intense emotion, of human stories that play out against the backdrop of cosmic principles, where a baker arguing with a customer over the weight of a loaf is, in a tiny way, reenacting the dispute between Enki and Enlil over their jurisdictions. Because once you introduce differentiation, you introduce the possibility of disagreement, of friction, of story, which is why the original, undifferentiated state had no stories. It just was. And why we, as storytelling creatures, could never truly abide it for long. We'd get bored and start making up epics about the drama between hot and cold before they were separated. As you relax, you can feel this principle in your own body. The differentiation between waking and sleeping, between tension and relaxation, between focused thought and drifting reverie. And the gentle journey you're on now is a return, a temporary integration of those differentiated parts back into a whole, a nightly, personal, peaceful reenactment of the original unity, without any of the divine bureaucratic paperwork. The evidence for this city as cosmos idea is embedded in its very language. The Sumerian word for city, Uru, is closely tied to the concept of gathering, of collection, while the word for land or nation, Kalam, implies something measured and ordered, both reflecting the act of drawing distinctions within a boundless space, of creating here as opposed to everywhere, a mental operation as crucial for founding a city as it is for forming a conscious thought. The ziggurat, called Temen, was not just a building but a foundation peg, driven into the chaos to secure the ordered world, a colossal version of the peg they used to secure measuring ropes, again linking the cosmic to the intensely practical, the act of defining a sacred precinct to the act of surveying a field, both being ways of imposing divine order onto the formless primordial potential. The fringe view gets very excited about the geometric and astronomical alignments of these structures, seeing in them encoded knowledge of precession or even cosmic addresses, a kind of Stone Age internet router pointing to the constellation of the gods, a notion that requires overlooking the fact that these buildings were often renovated, rebuilt, and shifted over centuries, so their original alignment might have been as much about the local river's bend as about Orion's belt. But it's a romantic thought. And romance is allowed in the land of Nod. Mainstream scholarship patiently maps the orientations, finds correlations with solstice sunrises or the movements of Venus, acknowledges the likely symbolic importance, and then cautions against overinterpretation, a balancing act that is the academic equivalent of walking a tightrope over a chasm of exciting but unproven possibilities, while the fringe theorists cheerfully jump into the chasm, claiming they've found a hidden trampoline at the bottom. The debate, as ever, is the soundtrack, not the main feature, a soothing murmur of, on the one hand, but on the other, a lullaby of balanced perspectives that ultimately encourages you to let go of the need for a single, hard answer, and to simply rest in the ambiguity, which is, incidentally, a state very close to that original, undifferentiated potential, where contradictory possibilities coexist peacefully. So let the image of the city soften. Let its sharp, mud-brick edges blur. Let the busy lanes empty of their ghostly crowds. And let the great ziggurat itself begin to dissolve, not into nothing, but back into the mound of earth it symbolically represents, the first land that rose from the primeval waters, and let that mound subside back into the calm, dark water of the Abzu, a gentle, backward journey through the layers of creation, facilitated by your own slowing breath. In this state, the distinction between the macrocosm of the universe and the microcosm of the city, and the microcosm of your own mind, begins to fade, a layered metaphor collapsing into a simple, felt experience of peace, which is perhaps the closest we can get, in our differentiated state, to touching that original condition, not through understanding, but through release. The original universe state, then, is not a distant memory, but a layer of reality always present beneath the surface, accessible through silence, through sleep, through the quiet moments when the city of your thoughts finally settles, and you can hear the faint, sweet-water murmur of your own being, prior to all stories, all roles, all lists of things to do. It's the background hum of your computer when all the applications are closed, the dark screen of your phone when it's powered off, not dead, but resting in potential, ready to light up with a world of differentiated icons when you wake. And with that, we can release the city, the temple, the pool, let them be absorbed back into the concept of order. And then let order relax its grip, allowing a gentle, welcoming sense of potential to rise, like cool, clear water from a deep, dark spring, filling the spaces between your thoughts, easing the distinctions in your body, welcoming you back for a little while to the state before the first word was written, before the first brick was laid. Before the first thought of I emerged from the peaceful, silent, and utterly complete we are. The bridge between that silent, underlying layer of reality and the clattering, specific world of historical events is, in the Sumerian worldview, a substance both utterly mundane and profoundly sacred. Clay, the very mud of the riverbanks, the primal soil from which they believed humanity was fashioned, and the medium upon which they inscribed the memory of that event, creating a perfect, recursive loop, where the material of creation becomes the material for recording creation. A meta-concept so elegant it almost makes up for the fact that working with wet clay is a messy, finger-raking business. Our steadfast mainstream historical fact is the development and evolution of the cuneiform writing system itself, from its origins around 3400 BCE as pictographic tokens and seals used for accounting in Uruk, through the simplification and abstraction of those pictures into wedge-shaped impressions made by a stylus, eventually becoming a flexible script capable of representing multiple languages and expressing everything from receipts to royal annals to the lamentations of a priestess, a journey from 3 sheep to the sorrow of a goddess for her slain husband, in about 1,000 years, which is actually a pretty impressive rate of literary evolution. The quirky, fringe interpretation will now mold in our mental hands, like a pleasing lump of cool, wet clay, is that the specific composition of the clay used for particularly important religious or cosmological texts was ritually prepared, imbued with substances or intentions meant to make the tablet not just a record, but a literal vessel for the concepts it described. A kind of sympathetic magic where writing about the Abzu on clay from a certain riverbank actually connected the object to that primal force, making archives into batteries of ancient knowledge, a theory that makes every cracked tablet in a museum basement a potential, dormant power cell of forgotten wisdom, which is a thrilling notion, if scientifically dubious. The scholarly debate that hums along in the background, like the low buzz of a fluorescent light in a museum archive, concerns the literacy rate in Sumer. Was writing a highly restricted, elite skill of scribes and priests, or was there a broader functional literacy among merchants and officials? A debate that shapes our understanding of how these ideas about the universe might have been disseminated, whether they were the secret knowledge of a temple inner circle or concepts that permeated society in simplified forms. much like modern cosmology, is understood by most through metaphors and headlines rather than equations. Picture the scribe's workshop. A courtyard shaded by a reed awning, pots of water and slabs of freshly dug, gray clay, a pile of clean river sand for temper, and the scribe himself sitting on a mat, his reed stylus in hand, a bowl of water to smooth the surface, and a mind holding either a grain delivery list or a hymn to the dawn, his hands performing the same physical action for both, pressing the triangular tip into the damp surface at precise angles to create wedges, lines, and curves. A dance of pressure and release that is the birth of history, one impression at a time. The sound is a soft thump drag as the stylus is pushed in and pulled, a rhythmic, repetitive, almost meditative sound, the sound of information being born from formlessness, a perfect ASMR trigger for the birth of bureaucracy, a sound that, if you listen closely in your imagination, begins to sync with your own heartbeat, tying you to that ancient moment of making marks, of creating distinction, of saying this is separate from that. The creation of humanity, as recorded in myths like Enki and Ninmah or the Atrahasis epic, involves this very material. The gods, tired of their own labor, gather some clay from the primordial Abzu, mix it, and fashion the first humans, who are then infused with the breath or blood of a sacrificed god, giving them life but also a connection to the divine. And crucially, the burden of work, which means from the very start, humanity's relationship with clay is one of identity and toil. We are mud that got a promotion, but with a lifetime of hard labor as part of the benefits package. The humor is, as ever, perfectly pitched. The gods create humans to do the farming and digging canals, freeing themselves up for more divine leisure, which backfires when humans become too noisy and populous, leading to divine annoyance and the flood, a classic management lesson about the unintended consequences of outsourcing your core drudgery, a lesson corporate America is still learning, albeit with less apocalyptic flooding, usually. The original universe state, in this context of clay and creation, is the undifferentiated mud itself, the mix of earth and water before it is shaped, the homogeneous, plastic potential waiting for the stamp of a divine or human will to give it form and purpose, a metaphor so powerful it has resonated across millennia, appearing in everything from the biblical Genesis to modern science fiction, because it's viscerally true. We all understand the magic of making something from a formless lump. Whether it's a pot, a statue, or a cuneiform tablet recording the recipe for beer. The fringe interpretation loves this, suggesting that the mixing of the clay from the Abzu is a coded reference to genetic engineering or biomechanical fabrication, performed by advanced beings, the Anunnaki reinterpreted as astronauts, a theory that turns the myth into literal ancient astronaut dogma and requires ignoring all the textual evidence about the gods' profoundly non-technological, petty, and often incompetent behaviors, but which provides a satisfyingly sci-fi sheen to the old story, perfect for drifting off into dreams that might involve stargates and oddly shaped styluses. Mainstream scholarship sees a powerful, poetic expression of humanity's intermediate nature. Part earthly matter, clay, part divine essence, breath, blood, forever caught between the base and the sublime, destined to work the earth from which we came, a poignant and enduring self-conception that likely brought comfort and meaning to the average Sumerian farmer, who could look at his own muddy hands and see not just dirt, but the very substance of his creation, sanctified by divine breath, which makes washing up after a long day a kind of minor theological event. The debate over the meaning of the sacrificed god in the mix, usually a rebel deity named Wheela or something similar, is a lively one. Does it represent the necessary cost of creation, the introduction of mortality, or the spark of divine rebellion that gives humans their independent spirit? This debate is the ancient equivalent of arguing over whether the glass is half full or half empty, but with higher stakes, as it concerns the fundamental nature of the human soul, or lack thereof. As you relax, you can feel this clay metaphor in your own body. The heaviness of your limbs, the sense of being a physical substance, molded into a particular form, breathing, alive, but with a deep, quiet substrate that is simply matter, simply potential, and sleep is the process of returning to a less differentiated state, where the specific form of your waking identity softens, and you become, for a while, just living clay, resting, regenerating, before the stylus of consciousness presses in again at dawn. The act of writing on clay is therefore a micro-creation. The tablet is the undifferentiated state, the scribe's hand is the divine will, the wedges are the me, the divine decrees being imposed, and the final, sun-baked or kiln-fired tablet is the fixed, manifest reality, a permanent, tangible piece of ordered thought, which is why they were used for contracts and laws. Once baked, they were almost immutable like a cosmic fact, unless you smashed them, which was the equivalent of a cosmic undo button, and happened more often than you'd think. The joke is that for all this cosmic symbolism, most tablets are, as noted, incredibly boring. Lists of workers, of rations, of gifts to the temple, the dry paperwork of civilization, which suggests that the gods, having created order, immediately delegated the spreadsheets to humanity, a tradition that continues unbroken to this day, in offices that are, sadly, not made of cool, evocative mud brick, but of depressing beige cubicle fabric. Yet even in these lists, the original state whispers. The very act of categorizing, of nomming person A and amount B, is an act of creation, of differentiation, of pulling distinct entities from the homogeneous mass of stuff, a cognitive technology as world-changing as the plow or the wheel, and one that shapes how we perceive reality at its most basic level, teaching us to see the world as a collection of separate, nameable things, rather than a unified whole. A habit of mind that is both incredibly useful and a profound source of existential loneliness, which is why we need stories and sleep to reconnect with the whole. The evidence for the centrality of clay is everywhere, literally underfoot in archaeological sites, in the millions of tablet fragments, in the very construction of their buildings, their pottery, their toys, their coffins. They lived in a world of baked mud, a ceramic civilization where the line between the ground they walked on, the walls that sheltered them, and the tablets that guided them was beautifully blurred, all just different expressions of earth and water transformed by human intention and fire. The fringe view often speculates about the firing process, wondering if certain temperatures were believed to lock in the spiritual essence of the text, or if the kilns were considered symbolic wombs or even portals, an alchemical transformation of soft, perishable thought into hard, permanent knowledge, a process we now do with servers and cloud storage, with significantly less elemental drama. Mainstream materials science studies the clay sources, the temper materials, the firing techniques to understand trade networks and technological development, a valuable but less romantic pursuit that tells us about the price of donkeys in but not about the soul of the universe, which is why we need both, the hard data and the soft, sleepy speculation, to get a full picture, or at least a pleasingly blurry one suitable for bedtime. The great epics were written on multiple tablets, a series of them, a physical sequence you had to lift and turn, a tangible journey through the narrative, unlike our seamless digital scroll, a reminder that even stories had a weight, a texture, a fragility. A dropped epic could literally shatter, a vulnerability that makes the survival of any complete text a minor miracle and a testament to the obsessive copying of generations of scribes, who were the hard drives of antiquity, albeit with a higher risk of being recycled as building filler or potsherds. So, as we near the midpoint of our journey, let the concept of clay soften and expand, let it become not just mud, but the primal, malleable substance of all that is, the original potential, the stuff before it is thinged, and feel your own body as that substance, heavy, relaxed, and receptive on the bed that is, for tonight your own personal slab of prepared clay, waiting not for inscriptions, but for the gentle, formative impressions of dreams. The original universe state in this tactile sense is this receptivity, this open, soft, undemanding presence, prior to the hard-baked definitions of the day, a state you are seamlessly sliding into, where the sharp wedges of "I must remember to" and "what about tomorrow" lose their edge and begin to flow back into the smooth slurry of preconsciousness. It is a state of profound creativity, because it is the state from which all forms emerge, but it is also a state of profound rest, because no forms are being demanded of it right now. It can just be as the dark, fertile silt at the bottom of the river of time, nourishing without effort. And with that, we can let the stylus fall from our mental hand. We can let the tablet of this narrative itself go slightly soft at the edges, the words blending, the concepts merging, moving from the specific story of Sumerian clay back to the general feeling of being made of something ancient, something elemental, something that was here long before words, and will remain long after the last word is forgotten. A deep, comforting, and utterly silent truth, settling over you now like the finest, most imperceptible layer of cosmic dust, which is, when you think about it, just another form of clay, waiting for a world to shape it. Having touched the clay, the medium, we must now listen for the voice that dictated the message, the concept of the divine word itself, the mu or ad in Sumerian, the spoken decree that could create and destroy, the vibration that organized reality, a concept that brings us to the heart of how the original, silent potential was thought to have been stirred into action. By a sound, a name, a command, which in the context of a scriptwriter talking you to sleep, is a delightfully meta concept, as my words are, right now, attempting to organize your reality into a state of peaceful slumber. A much humbler goal than creating a universe, but arguably more achievable in the next 20 minutes. Our reliable mainstream historical fact is the existence and function of a vast corpus of Sumerian incantations, hymns, and lamentations, performed by a specialized priesthood, particularly the Gala or lamentation priests, who sometimes sang in a dialect called Emezal, and the En or high priests and priestesses, whose ritual utterances were believed to have tangible power to heal, protect, and maintain cosmic order, essentially using spoken language as a tool for reality maintenance. A concept any motivational speaker would envy. The fringe interpretation we'll hum to ourselves, like a half-remembered tune, is that these incantations used specific phonetic sequences, rhythms, and tonalities that directly resonated with the fabric of the original universe state, a kind of acoustic technology to tap into the background hum of creation and nudge reality in desired ways, making the temple not just a bureaucratic center, but a broadcasting station sending harmonic prayers into the cosmic substrate. A theory that makes karaoke night at the temple sound like a high-stakes engineering project. The scholarly debate that provides a dry, academic countermelody focuses on the performative aspect of these texts. Were they always sung or chanted? What was the accompanying music or ritual action? How did the acoustics of temple spaces affect their impact? A debate that tries to reconstruct a multisensory experience from silent, damaged texts, a challenge akin to reconstructing a symphony from its libretto alone, a frustrating but fascinating puzzle. Imagine the scene in the temple's inner courtyard at dusk. The air cooling, the scent of cedar smoke thick, a small group of priests standing before a statue of the god, their voices rising in a repetitive, rhythmic chant, perhaps accompanied by the soft beat of a drum or the strum of a lyre, the sounds echoing off the plastered mud brick walls, creating a resonance that feels larger than the space, intended to carry the words beyond the physical realm into the ears of the divine, or into the very structure of things. This is not entertainment. It is work, the vital work of using the human voice to reinforce the patterns laid down at the beginning, to remind the universe of its intended order, to plead for fertility, to avert disaster, a daily, vocal gardening of cosmic reality, which is a beautiful way to think about prayer, as gentle, persistent weeding and watering of the fabric of existence. The humor, because there must always be humor, lies in the content of some of these incantations, which, alongside profound invocations of cosmic principles, might include very specific requests, like a spell to stop a baby from crying, or a chant to cure a toothache caused by a worm, as recorded in actual texts, blending the majestic and the miserably human in a way that is both hilarious and deeply relatable, because even in a universe sustained by divine word, you still have to deal with teething infants and dental parasites. Cosmic order be damned. The original universe state in this auditory framework is the silence before the first word, the stillness before the first vibration, the perfect auditory zero from which all sounds emerge and into which they eventually return, a concept that makes the background hum of your fan or the faint traffic noise outside your window not an interruption, but a distant, faded echo of that first, creative resonance, a thought that can transform annoyance into a connection with the primal symphony. The creation stories often involve naming as the primary creative act. The god separates heaven and earth and then names them, fixing their identity and function, a pattern repeated for every element of the world, establishing that in the beginning was the Word, but a very specific administrative word like a divine project manager assigning titles to new departments. You shall be sky, you shall be earth. And you, Marsh Reed, you're in charge of prying them apart. Good luck. The fringe view seizes on this, interpreting the power of the name as a fundamental programming command in the reality code, suggesting that knowing the true name of a god or a force gave one control over it, a trope familiar from fantasy literature, but rooted in this ancient, very serious belief, which explains why some divine names in the texts are cryptic or hidden, the equivalent of keeping the admin password secret from the junior staff. Humanity. Mainstream scholarship examines the linguistics of divine names, their epithets, their evolution across regions and time, seeing in them clues to the merging of different city-state pantheons and the political rise and fall of gods, a process where Enlil of Nippur might absorb the attributes of a local god from a smaller town, a divine corporate takeover reflected in a new, compound name, proving that branding is as old as civilization itself. The debate over the effectiveness of these incantations from a modern perspective is, of course, settled. We don't believe chanting killed toothache worms, but the debate about their social and psychological effectiveness is vibrant, recognizing that in a world perceived as governed by capricious divine wills, having a prescribed, authoritative formula to recite in times of crisis provided immense comfort and a sense of agency, which is, not coincidentally, one of the functions of bedtime stories and sleep meditations today. We've just swapped, "O God Enki, bountiful Lord," for "visualize a peaceful meadow." The technology of calming the mind through structured narrative is timeless. As you listen now, my voice is attempting a similar, though secular, incantation, using rhythm, repetition, and soothing imagery to guide your mind from the differentiated chaos of wakefulness toward the unified silence of sleep, a humble, modern echo of the Gala priest's lament, though aimed at conquering insomnia instead of appeasing a storm god, and arguably with a higher success rate, given the gods' reputations for unpredictability. The very act of focusing on a voice, of letting the meaning of words become secondary to their sound and rhythm, is a step toward that original, pre-linguistic state, where sound was not yet parsed into symbolic meaning, but was just vibration, just presence, a wave moving through the medium of your awareness without the burden of interpretation, which is why listening to a language you don't understand can be so relaxing, and why the murmuring of Sumerian priests, were we to hear it, might be just as effective as this, if not more, due to the exotic novelty. So let the content of what I'm saying become less important. Let the words become mere sounds, the sentences become rhythmic structures, the pauses become resting places for your attention. And in doing so, you are practicing a form of acoustic regression, moving back from the complex, meaning-laden language of your day toward the simpler, more fundamental experience of sound as sensation, which is a gateway to the silent source of all sensation. The evidence for the power of the word is embedded in the texts themselves, Many tablets begin with invocatory phrases like "hear" or "praise," and the hymns are full of descriptions of the God's word causing abundance or destruction, establishing a direct causal link in their cosmology between divine speech and material effect. A worldview where poetry and physics were not yet divorced, where a beautifully composed hymn to a river god was as practically important as a well-maintained irrigation channel, perhaps more so, because it addressed the intention behind the flow. The joke for us is the anachronistic image of a Sumerian priest trying to file a complaint. My incantation for clear skies was perfectly recited, with optimal resonance in the third stanza, and yet it rained during the harvest festival. I demand to speak to the manager of atmospheric deities. To which the head priest would likely reply, "Did you use the updated version of the hymn? The one from Nippur? The version is deprecated since the spring equinox. Always check the celestial software updates." This anachronism is funny because it highlights the universal human tendency to systemize and then get frustrated when our systems fail, a tendency that spans from ancient liturgy to modern app-based living, a comforting continuity of mild exasperation. The original universe state, from this auditory perspective, is not a void, but a fullness of potential sound, a complete spectrum of all possible frequencies in perfect, unchanging harmony, a cosmic chord that was never struck because to strike it would be to select some frequencies over others, initiating differentiation, which is why the first divine word is such a cataclysmic event. It's the first note chosen from the infinite chord, breaking the symmetry. And everything that follows is just an elaboration on that first, fateful note. The fringe interpretation loves to map this onto string theory or the holographic principle, where the fundamental constituents of reality are vibrating strings and information, is encoded on a 2D surface, making the Sumerian emphasis on creative vibration seem prophetically scientific. A classic case of finding what you're looking for in the Rorschach test of antiquity, but a fun game to play as long as we don't mistake it for history. Mainstream historians of religion see a profound intuition about the nature of consciousness and language. That our ability to name and describe the world is intimately tied to our ability to perceive and shape it. That the world we experience is, in a very real sense, spoken into being by our shared linguistic frameworks, a concept that philosophers would explore millennia later, but which the Sumerians enacted ritually every day, believing that by correctly naming the parts of the world, they helped keep it together. So as we approach the final section of our journey, let your own internal voice, the one that narrates your day, that worries, that plans, begin to quiet not by force, but by being gently drowned out by the external, rhythmic sound of this narrative, or by the silence between the words, allowing the auditory field of your mind to simplify, to move from the complex symphony of daytime thought toward a single, sustained drone, the foundational hum of your own being, which is your personal access point to that original, silent potential. It's the sound of your blood in your ears, the sound of your breath, the almost imperceptible sonic fingerprint of your aliveness, a sound that was there before you understood language, and will be there after you've forgotten these words, a timeless, personal name word that simply says, "I am," without any need for further elaboration. And with that, we can let the specific incantations fade, the priestly chants dissolve into echoed whispers, and the whispers into the memory of sound, and that memory into the fertile silence from which it first arose, a silence that is not empty but pregnant with rest, ready to receive you as you complete the journey from the word back to the source of the word, from the differentiated vibration back to the undifferentiated potential, a journey that is, in its own quiet way, a homecoming. And so we arrive at the final layer, not of the story, but of our descent into the original state itself, a return to the condition that these ancient tablets, in their fragmented, poetic, and administrative ways, continually point toward. A state of unified, restful potential, the cosmic analog of the deep, dreamless sleep you are now entering, where all the distinctions we've explored, clay and scribe, water and land, sound and silence, God and human, softly dissolve back into the homogeneous whole, not as an ending, but as a necessary, rejuvenating pause in the cycle of being. Our last, anchoring mainstream historical fact is the simple, physical reality of these tablets as artifacts. They were stored, often in ordered archives, and when the building that housed them was abandoned or destroyed, they were left buried in the collapse, where they lay for millennia forgot until excavated by archaeologists, their meanings lost and then painstakingly regained, a cycle of loss and recovery that mirrors the cosmological cycle of differentiation and return, a tangible reminder that even the most permanent-seeming records are subject to the gentle, relentless entropy of time, and yet they endure. Much like the human need to ask these questions endures. The final quirky interpretation will allow to float, like a dust mote in a sunbeam, through our drowsy minds is the idea that the very act of studying these tablets in a state of relaxed, open awareness, like the one you're in now, can allow for a form of intuitive, non-linear understanding, a kind of dream-logic connection with the scribes who made them, as if the silence of deep focus bridges the centuries, not to transmit specific information, but to share the state of wonder itself. A fringe theory that is charmingly unprovable and therefore perfectly safe for bedtime. The scholarly debate that fades into a distant, lulling murmur is the ultimate, ongoing one. What is the value of studying these ancient, broken worldviews? Is it to understand human intellectual history, to trace the origins of our concepts, or is there a more humanistic value in simply listening to the voices of the past, in acknowledging their sophisticated attempts to make sense of a terrifying and beautiful universe, attempts that, in their essence, are no different from our own? This debate resolves, in the context of sleep, into a gentle affirmation of the latter. The value is in the connection, in the shared, timeless project of being a conscious entity wondering about its source. Picture not a bustling city or a busy temple, but a deserted archive long after the last priest has left, the roof beams collapsed, the walls slump back into mounds, and the tablets now just broken pieces of baked clay scattered in the dirt, slowly being covered by wind-blown silt, each fragment holding a few wedges of a story, a list, a prayer waiting in the dark in the silence, holding their potential meaning for thousands of years, until one day a careful brush uncovers one. And a modern eye, squinting in the sun, tries to piece together the first word, a moment of recreation as miraculous in its own way as the first nomming of the sky. This is where history meets the original state, in the long, quiet period of potential between being written and being read, between being spoken and being heard, a latency that is not emptiness, but a kind of patient fullness, the state these tablets were in for most of their existence, and the state your mind approaches now, a latency rich with the possibility of dreams, but not yet imposing them. The original universe state, as conceptualized through this long journey, is not a one-time historical event buried irretrievably in the past, but a permanent layer of reality, the background canvas upon which the picture of existence is painted, the dark screen that allows the light of stars to be seen, the silence between musical notes that gives them shape and meaning, and crucially, the deep, non-dreaming sleep that restores and makes possible the vivid dreaming and wakefulness that follow. In the Sumerian cyclical view, where kingship descended from heaven and could be taken away, where floods could reset civilization, there was always the understanding that order emerged from and could return to chaos, not as a punishment, but as part of a rhythm, a cosmic inhalation and exhalation, and our nightly sleep is a personal, voluntary, and gentle participation in that rhythm, a daily, mini-flood that resets our own internal world. The humor in this final stretch is the ultimate punchline. After all this, the gods, the creation, the cities, the tablets, the incantations, the most direct, reliable, and accessible experience of that primal state available to any of us, king or slave, ancient or modern, is simply to close our eyes and let go, to surrender the magnificent, complicated differentiation of our waking selves to the simple, unified peace of sleep, a truth so obvious and universal that it's easy to overlook. Like a massive ziggurat in the middle of your living room that you've gotten used to and now use as a coat rack. So as this narrative voice begins to recede, as the words become sparser, the sentences longer and slower, like a river widening and calming as it approaches the sea, consider that you are not just hearing about the original universe state. You are, in a very real physiological and neurological sense, migrating toward it, your brainwaves slowing from the beta of waking thought to the alpha of relaxed focus, to the theta of drowsiness, and soon to the delta of deep sleep. A journey inward that mirrors the cosmic journey backward through time and differentiation we've been tracing in the clay. The tablets, the evidence, have served their purpose. They have been the stylus that pressed the wedges of these ideas into the soft clay of your attention. And now, the shaping is done, the form is complete, and it is time to let it bake, to let it set, not through the heat of the sun, but through the gentle warmth of your own resting metabolism, fixing this quiet understanding not in clay, but in the deeper, more fluid substrate of your subconscious. The fringe idea of intuitive connection across time feels most plausible here, in the hypnagogic state, because in the blurring of boundaries between wakefulness and sleep, the distance between you and a scribe in both of you tired at the end of a long day of mental labor, both of you seeking rest, feels negligible. You are both human, facing the same magnificent mystery of consciousness and its temporary cessation, a fellowship in vulnerability and hope that transcends all epochs and technologies. The scholarly debate about value fades into irrelevance, because in this moment the value is felt, not argued. It is the value of shared humanity, of a story that ends, as all good stories should, with a return to a place of peace, a closure that is also an opening into the formless, fertile dark where new stories are born in dreams. Now let the last of the images dissolve. Let the archive dust settle. Let the last wedge-shaped shadow fade from your mind's eye. Let the murmur of priestly chants become the hum of your fan or the whisper of your own breath. There is no more to analyze, no more jokes to parse, no more debates to follow. There is only the quiet invitation to complete the journey, to cross the final threshold from listening to not listening, from thinking to not thinking, from being someone in a specific time and place to simply being a part of the peaceful, eternal is. The original universe state is here, now in the weight of your body on the bed, in the darkness behind your eyelids, in the gradual release of the identity that carries a name, a history, a to-do list. You are returning for a few precious hours to the condition before the first word was pressed into the clay of your day, to the silent, sweet water depth of your own abzu, where everything is possible and nothing is yet demanded. It is not an escape from reality, but a return to its source, a daily pilgrimage to the root of your own being, and from there you will emerge again at dawn, recreated, refreshed, ready to once more separate the light from the darkness, the tasks from the possibilities, and to write your own day's tablet, however briefly, before returning it all to this silent, patient, eternal mud. So let go of the narrative thread, it has served its purpose. Let go of the voice guiding you. The evidence in the tablets was just a map, and you have arrived at the territory. The journey is complete. The story is over. All that remains is the deep, welcoming, and utterly original silence. End of script. Sweet dreams.